Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and for those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Melissa Reed and I am a mixed media abstract artist from Pennsylvania. Today I am doing another of my mixed media collage pieces. This is similar to the one that I did a couple of weeks ago. I am going to be using a 6" by 12" cradled board, which I have applied white gesso to. And I am using one of my handmade stencils here with some modeling paste to give a little bit of texture to my board to begin the process. So once I get this on there the way I'd like it, I have to let this dry for a while. This typically is best left to dry overnight, but it's probably okay if you let it dry just for a few hours, but I always let it go overnight just to make sure it's good and dry. Once I've got that on there, I'm going in with a little bit of Payne's Gray just to start getting a little bit of color down on the board. At this point, I really have no specific plan for the piece. I did put a bird in my last one, and I do very much like birds. You know that about me if you've watched any of my other videos, so I'm kind of leaning in that direction, but it really could go anywhere from this point, which is one of the things that I really love about the intuitive art process. You just kind of start and get going and you see what happens, and I really like that. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm putting down a little bit more paint. I went in with a piece of corrugated cardboard and added a little bit of texture there on the right hand side. Now I'm going in with a little bit of raw umber, and I'm just giving a little bit of brown warmth to the cool Payne's Gray and kind of just blending everything together. Still not 100% sure what the final color palette of this is going to be, but I know I definitely want some dark colors on the base of this, and those will show through when I put either some translucent colors on top of it or even opaque colors that I don't entirely cover the surface with will be visible through the paint. So here I'm going in with a little bit of Grumbacher red, which is one of my absolute most favorite red colors ever. I love this stuff. I use it in just about everything. It's just a nice, bright, dense, rich red color. And I'm just kind of going in with my paint shaper there and applying a little bit to the non-textured side, but I'm also going over all of the textured pieces. And what this is doing is just hitting the tops of the texture, so it's really pronouncing that texture. And I am going in a little bit in between each of the little shapes that I have there just to get more paint kind of down in those holes too. But I really like the way that looks when it just kind of touches the upper edges of those textured pieces. One thing that I've found when using the color shapers is the paint gets spread very thin, so it dries very, very quickly, and acrylic paint dries quickly to begin with, and because you're using such a thin layer spread very, very thin over the top of the board, that dries almost instantaneously. Maybe not quite that quick, but you don't have a lot of working time with it. So here I'm going in with a little bit of golden fluid acrylics in Tighten Buff, and I'm doing that just to lighten up some of the areas again. Still not entirely sure what I'm going to be doing, but I do know that I want a little more light than that I have in there. I'm also going in with a light pink color, and I believe that's a Winsor & Newton Pale Rose, and that's a color that I use pretty frequently. I like it a lot. I'm just taking a mop brush here and kind of just going over everything and giving it a nice good even coat, and then I'm going back in with my color shaper and removing some of that paint. So you're still going to be left with a thin veil over the red with that Tighten Buff and pink mixture, but you're going to be able to see where it caught on top of that texture just like the other colors did before. And as I'm removing some of that with the color shaper as well as with a wet paper towel, some of that red and the darker colors are coming back out and becoming visible again. I employ a lot of layers in my work. I think visually layers are very interesting and really can be what gives a very unique look to each individual piece. So you will notice if you look at any of my past work, it's got tons of layers visually and also actual textural layers with things like the modeling paste and layers of collage. Speaking of collage, I'm about to go in just a moment and lay down some torn up book pages, which I love to use in my work. I like how some of the words will peek out and it's not necessarily readable, nor do you necessarily want it to be, but I do like the look of using text, and there's many different ways that you can use text in your art. I will probably do a video entirely on different ways to use text in mixed media art, but this is one of my favorites because you're kind of giving life to a new life to an old object that you maybe don't want anymore, or have hanging around. I've got tons of old books. This one I actually bought specifically for the purpose of making art. I got it at a used bookstore near my house. It's A Tale of Two Cities, in case anybody was interested. And I've been using it for nearly a year now, and I still have tons of pages left. So it's a really good resource to have, and it'll last a really long time. One of the things I'm doing here with this collage is not only just adding the text, but it's also adding a little more lightness. Like I had said, I added some of that Titan buff and some of the pale rose paint to lighten things up a little bit, but this will automatically do that as well because obviously the book pages are a kind of pale beige color. So that's going to instantly lighten everything up, which I am then of course going to cover with some more paint, but it gives me a little bit more room to allow different tones and different shades to come through. Here I'm going in with just a pencil, actually. Any mark making tool will do. I like to have just random ones laying around and I'll grab whatever strikes my fancy at the moment. It's usually a pencil because I like leaving the marks on there that are actually visible and not just something that is carving into the paint, although I will sometimes use that as well. And once I have that on there, I decided I wanted a little bit more of the dark paint to go back in, so I am using that raw umber again just to hit the very tops of the texture pieces. I like to build up many textures so that it's much more interesting to look at. And I wanted to go in and add some of that color there on the right hand side too, just to get something covering up a little bit of the book pages. And I'm going to go in with more different colors as well. Like here I am using my burnt sienna, which is one of my absolute favorite colors. You'll see me use that in a lot of different pieces that I've made in the past, and I will probably continue using it in the future because I just think it's a wonderful warm color. It's very translucent, so you can still see what's going on underneath with any kinds of shapes or colors that you have that might want to peek through. It's a really great color to use. I was also starting to feel that the color scheme was just a little bit too much on the cool side, so that was a nice way to warm it up really quickly. Then I wanted to brighten things up a little bit, and I went in with some teal paint, which is another one of my favorite colors. If you've watched any of my other videos or look at my art, you will definitely see that I have my preferences, and I very infrequently stray from those, and sometimes I think I need to break out of my habits and to try something else, and every time I do, I end up going back to it because it's really just not what speaks to me, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you have your favorites or your preferences, go with them. It's part of your style, and it's a good way to have somebody look at a piece and immediately know that it's yours. Now that big swath at the bottom there is just telling me that it needs to have something added, and so I'm going to go in with some more collage, and you will see that this is something that I often do. I will just add paint on top of collage on top of paint, and that's another way to really build layers. A lot of times I will just start out with the collaged book pages right on the gessoed board, and that will kind of be my base layer, and then I start just doing either my painting or my texture paste right on top of that. And honestly, I think that's probably my preferred way to go, but I thought I'd change it up a little bit this time just to keep it interesting, and I really like the way this piece turned out at the end, even though it definitely had its awkward moments there in the middle, which I'm sure you can all relate to. Sometimes a piece has to go through its ugly duckling phase before it ends up growing into something beautiful. Once this layer of collage is down, I'm going to go in with a little bit more paint because I want to kind of bring everything together again. It kind of just looks like a giant hot mess right now. I totally realize that, but bear with me because it does get lots better. So what I'm doing here is I'm going in with some Liquitex Basics Fluorescent Red. This is another color that I like a whole lot. It's just got that nice intense pop of neon to it that adds something that you just can't get from anything else. And what I'm mixing that with is matte gel medium, which incidentally I should have mentioned, that's what I'm using to lay down all of my collage pieces too. I love the matte gel medium. You can use the gloss gel. I prefer the matte because I don't necessarily want a glossy finish, and if I do, I can always add one afterwards. But this is also great to add to a more opaque paint and make it more translucent. So if I want to be able to see some of that text from those book pages through there, or I want to see some of the shapes and have some of the color underneath peek through, that's a really great way to make that happen while still using a color that I want to use. And you don't end up having to buy different variations of the same color when you've got what you need to mix it there right on hand. Next up, I'm coming in with that piece of corrugated cardboard again, and this is such a wonderful tool to have on hand. And I mean, it's free. Who doesn't have cardboard boxes laying around? And even if you don't have a piece that has the corrugation exposed, you can easily peel that top layer off. It's even easier if you spray it down with a little bit of water and let it sit for a minute or two and soften up. You can just kind of tear that right off and the corrugation will be exposed. I was lucky this piece came in something that I had delivered, and it was only, the corrugation was completely exposed on one side, so it only had the backing on the one side. So I was able to have access to that immediately. So you can see it made those nice stripes there near the bottom. And now I'm actually going in with a little bit more of that teal blue because I thought it needed brightened up again, and it needed to have some blue. It was a little unbalanced. So balance is important when you are working in abstract because you have to kind of keep the principles of art in mind, or it just starts to look like you grabbed a bunch of stuff and threw it at a canvas or a board, and there doesn't necessarily seem to be any rhyme or reason or focus to it, at least in my opinion. I'm speaking for my own art. Obviously, if you don't feel that way, make whatever art you want to make. But for me, it needed to be a little more balanced, and that blue is doing just that. It's bringing a little more visual weight over there to the left-hand side and not making it so right-hand heavy like I felt like it was before. I also really love how when I went in with the color shaper on that teal, it was emphasizing those lines that corrugated cardboard put in and really kind of creating just a fantastic look down there with all of the vertical lines and the stripes that came from that. You could see them before when they were just in the red, but having the blue go down into those grooves really kind of popped everything for me there. While I have the blue handy, I'm just adding a few more touches here and there. I'm kind of just getting a little bit of it on the side of the color shaper and just dragging that over the top of the raised portions from the modeling paste. And again, it's just adding a little more interest to those pieces that are actually textured and giving them a little more visual texture there too, which is going to make them pop. I'll go in and do this with a couple other colors and you'll be able to see how that really comes out in the end. Now I'm starting to think about how I might want to proceed with this piece, and I definitely know I want to add some contrasting collage to it. So I'm going to use what has become one of my absolute favorite shapes, and I'm going to be subjecting this to you for a long time if you watch my videos because I am obsessed with this, which I accidentally discovered when I was doing my ransom note lettering video a couple of weeks ago. I will put a link to that there at the end if you want to check that out. It's really cool. I'm going to be using some of that in this, but I don't really go through the whole process of how to make it. But a happy little accident happened when I was making those pieces because I did them using magazine image transfer, and you know how well that goes. Or if you haven't tried that, let me just tell you, it works when it feels like it, and that's not very often. So I was trying to get the letters to print, and that's what those little boxes are, but the letters didn't actually end up transferring. But they did give me these wonderful little squares with this grungy background, and I absolutely love this. So I've actually been making some of these on purpose just to have around as collage papers because I just absolutely love the look of this. And this is going to be used in quite a bit of my future work, I think. I'd like to really do a larger scale piece using that and making some larger blocks, but there's just something about the quality of the way this looks that speaks to me so much. And I think you're going to see what I mean when this piece is finished and how it all comes together. You might notice here that I'm going in with the edge of my card that I'm using to smooth everything down there and intentionally distressing some of the edges. I didn't really want them to be as square as they had turned out, so I went in and just kind of chewed them up a little bit, I guess you could say, with the edge of that, or with the corner of that card, and it just knocked that super square cube look down that I didn't really want, because nothing else in this piece has such a hard, definitive shape, and that was kind of standing out and bothering me, so I just went ahead and got rid of that. And unfortunately, you can't really see it. It's kind of running off the page now, but I'm putting a darker piece of that same kind of cube collage paper at the bottom just to draw the eye down to the bottom, because I want that bottom left-hand corner to carry the most visual weight, and right now the top right-hand corner is. And it mimics the shape of the boxes that are in the white collage piece on top, because it's actually the piece that I used to pick up the excess paint when I was trying to pull those ransom note letters that I was telling you about. And again, I will put a link at the end of the video. You should check that one out. It's a pretty cool idea, and I hadn't seen anybody do it before. I'm sure probably someone had, but I'd never seen it, and I wanted to give it a try, and it actually worked as well as any magazine image transfer actually works. So here I'm going to show you right now the piece that I did with some of those letters on it today, and I printed them in white paint because the background is pretty dark, so I wanted them to show up pretty well. And I am using the word go, G-O, in here. So I printed several G's and several O's because you never know what's going to work and what's not, but I actually got lucky and every single one of them printed, so I got to choose which ones that I wanted. So that's what I got there, and you're going to be able to see it better once I have it collaged down with the matte medium. Some of that tissue paper that I have it printed onto is going to just melt into the background, kind of, because that's a wonderful quality that tissue paper has when you're using it as a collage paper. It kind of not completely disappears, but it becomes part of the background enough that whatever you have printed on it is prominent, and you'll be able to see that here in a second. It's kind of lightening up a little bit there, and then I'm going in with my card and smoothing it down, and you can see how obviously you can still see the squares, and I wanted the squares to be seen, but it's going into the background enough that it gets the job done. So here I'm using one of my handmade, this is actually the mask from a stencil that I cut. I cut several bird stencils because I love to use birds, and I don't always want to have to, in the moment, fuss and try to get the shape of what I want exactly right. So I just made several different stencils that I can pick from, and I never really use them in their entirety. I will just draw the basic shape out, and then I'll just go in and adjust as I'm painting. Sometimes I might want the beak to be a little fuller or maybe a little thinner depending on what bird I'm trying to portray. Sometimes it's not even necessarily a specific kind of bird, although I am fond of ravens, so I typically go with black, and they all kind of are raven-esque, I guess, if you will. But now I'm just going in with a very fine brush and some black Liquitex paint. I believe that's Mars Black that I have there. And I'm just going in and filling in the bird shape. And what this is going to do is bring even more weight to the bottom left-hand quadrant of this piece, which is where I wanted everything to be. And he's kind of looking up. The word go is going to be directly above his head. And when this gets finished and dried, I think you're going to really like the way it looks. I'm super happy with how it turned out. And, you know, such an interesting part of the intuitive process when you don't know what you're going to end up with. I love that. I think it's interesting to think how your own mind works, and when you are quickly in the moment making decisions what you come up with. Sometimes you can even surprise yourself. So here I grabbed a micron pen, which is just a very, very fine pen, and I didn't think those letters were standing out quite enough. So I just went in and outlined them, not solidly. I didn't go around the whole entire letter, just gave a little tiny bit of shading in some certain areas to the G and the O, and it makes it stand out just a little bit more. And when I was done with that, I still thought it was missing something, so I went in and added some very fine lines all up and down the white portion of where the boxes are there. And I think that added exactly what I needed to make me pretty happy with the finished piece. Like I said, it is a very fine pen, so I did go back over some of the lines a little bit. I didn't want to use anything any thicker because it wasn't going to give the look that I wanted, but when I went back over and did some of them a little bit darker, it was absolutely perfect for what I kind of had been feeling when I put them down in the first place. At this point, I got to ask myself the very difficult question, is this finished? And I will either immediately know the answer to that, or sometimes I will have to walk away from it for an hour or two, or sometimes even overnight. And then when I go back to it, I will instantly know, okay, it needs such and such, or nope, this is exactly the way I want it. And once I got these lines on there and stood back for a moment and looked at it, I was very happy with the way this piece had turned out, and it didn't need any more work. So I just went ahead and put my signature in the bottom right-hand corner and called it a day. So this piece is entitled, You'd Better Run. I'm going to finish it just by spraying it with Krylon's triple thick acrylic spray, I believe it is. Yeah. And it's going to put a nice finish on it. It's going to be very glossy and just protect it, which is exactly what I want it to do. I'm just bringing it in here so you can kind of see a close-up of all of the individual pieces. And here it is finished. I hope you enjoyed the journey with this one, and thank you all for coming back if you are returning, and thank you for checking me out for the first time if you are a new viewer. And if you would just take a minute if you haven't already, and please click subscribe and give me a like if you like what you saw, and thank you all so much. I hope you have a great day.